How to show up on camera so people actually want to listen to you. What a professional mime artist, 25 years of mastering communication without words, can teach every business professional about being impossible to ignore. That's right, 25 years as a mime artist. Dr. Chris Willems is going to join me. He's a specialist communication consultant with 40 years in the performing arts and television, including, as I said, 25 years as a professional mime artist. There's lots to learn, lots we're going to discuss about how to show up on camera, why it's so important to let your brand really shine, and how to make the most of it even when you feel like you are not great on camera. We want to give you all the tips and tricks that are really going to set you apart and make you feel comfortable and ready to perform. Well, perform with a lowercase p, and you'll hear more about that, including tips and tricks that will be in a downloadable workbook. Stay tuned for all of that and lots of other special things. I'm Anthony Pearl. Let's get into making your podcast thrive on Podcast Done For You show. Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. How do you get prepared to make sure you're going to give your best version of you on camera? Well, I have just the man that is going to help us work through all of that. Dr. Chris, welcome to Podcast Done For You show.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, I guess we've got to start off by allowing people to understand a little bit more about you. So do you want to fill us in a little bit on your amazing background?
Well, it's pretty diverse, I have to say. Well, my professional background spans more than 40 years in the performing arts and television, although I started off in consulting engineering, but essentially 50 years in the performing arts and television. And for 25 of those years, I was a professional mime artist. And I can just about hear everyone thinking, well, what the hell's mime got to do with corporate communication, which is what I do now. But when you consider that mime at its most fundamental consists of the analysis, manipulation, and stylization of body language, and body language forms so much part of human communication, it kind of makes sense. Well, certainly did to me 25 years ago, when I decided to morph into corporate communications and concentrating on body language and nonverbals, and also on camera. I have a background in television as well. So that's kind of the brief potted history of my background and why I've arrived at where I have in the professional world.
Well, I think there's so much we could explore with that, and we won't delve too deep into that right now, except to say that what we want to do in this episode particularly is start to focus on why some of those things matter. I think the interesting thing about you having that background in mind is that you're talking very much about the non-verbal cues, and like it or not, people take that in, right? When they have a look, they decide whether they're going to like you or not, and how they're going to feel about whatever it is you're presenting.
Well, that's absolutely right, Anthony. And in fact, people can lie with words, but generally speaking, their bodies don't lie, unless you're a very good actor or a mime artist, as I was. The body will always reflect how you are feeling, how you're feeling emotionally, and what's going through your head. So, the famous research by Albert Mehrabian suggests that 55% of communication is nonverbal, 38% is how you sound, i.e., the tone of your voice, which leaves a miserable 7% in terms of the words that you say. So if those three things aren't working together, if they're incongruent, and no one's going to take a blind bit of notice of the 7% of the words that you're saying, because if they conflict with what your body's telling your audience or the person you're talking to, then they're going to go with the body language every time.
And I want to point out to people listening in today that all of these things that we're going to talk to are relevant not just in podcasting, because the reality is, come COVID, we all moved into very much an online world. So how you present yourself on camera is appropriate for people to take in, whether they're doing a podcast or not. And if you look back at that time, and I remember it vividly because, prior to COVID, I remember asking a few businesses, could we do a meeting on Zoom? And aside from what the hell is Zoom, I would then get back a message saying, oh, our IT department won't let us install that kind of software.
Wow.
And it was, and that was the thing, there was the days of Skype and those kinds of things as well. And then we quickly moved into a situation where we were dependent on it.
Absolutely.
And what was really interesting was, if you talk about the non-verbal cues, you went from seeing a CEO in his suit and tie in his office, where you were, physically shaking hands and sitting down behind a desk, to seeing that same CEO in shorts and a t-shirt, kids running around, dogs going everywhere, in the kitchen, like mess everywhere. We've gone through these different phases of it, and I think that it's really important to understand that how you present yourself is critical, and it doesn't have to be the suit and tie, by the way. I mean, I think those days, unless you're in a really stringent corporate environment, have gone to an extent as well.
I agree, and I agree absolutely, Anthony, that on screen with podcasts and Zoom meetings, excuse me, it is important, absolutely important, to send the right message. And yes, we've relaxed a bit with the cat walking past in the background and the kids, whatever. But increasingly, because we use Zoom not just for COVID reasons now, but it's become kind of a second default, really, and quite handy for geographically separated meetings. But it's important that there's a level of professionalism that we don't go below in terms of Zoom. In fact, one of the examples I use when I coach people is actually Boris Johnson's cabinet. When they did their Zoom meeting, there was a front page of the Guardian newspaper, and it's full of, we've been using Zoom for a few years now, but we haven't actually necessarily gotten that much better at it in terms of things like lighting and what's in your background. Do you have a palm tree growing out of your head? Those kinds of things that, what else is in the frame besides you? Because it's important in the professional context. Family things are different, but in the professional context, it's really important to remember that Zoom can be a micro-marketing opportunity in terms of how other people perceive you. And because in that 3 nanoseconds, they've made a judgment about who you are and how professional or otherwise you might be. So yes, it's a bit looser, but these days it's important to maintain a level of professionalism. And ironically, now people say, well, what's the point of body language on screen, because we only see this much of you. Well, the ironic thing is that the body is informed by how we move. For instance, if you're someone who gestures a lot, I really encourage people to keep gesturing while they're on screen, even if we can't see it. If this gets distracting, so you don't do it in front of your face. But keep gesturing, because gesturing actually activates the body and the face and the eyes, and strangely enough, the voice. And you've got a background in radio and media, so you would know that we can hear a smile. We can hear when the voice is really flat. So so not that you have to smile all the time, but the things like gesturing are really, really important to maintain that aliveness in the body, the face, and the eyes, and the voice.
And I totally agree with you, what you're saying about the smile and being able to project that in the way that you talk. You can hear it if people are listening in now. I encourage you, next time, the best way to do is to listen to the ads on TV, because when you listen to the ads on TV and radio for that matter, you can tell when certain ads require them to be happy, and you can hear the smile in the way that they're delivering it, as opposed to the very serious kinds of tones and things. And I think that there are definitely those verbal cues, but I think that what we want to focus on is some of the non-verbal stuff today. And I think that what's really important for people is, as a starting point, is to almost get over how they look, because the hardest part is the amount of times that I have encountered people saying, "Oh, but I don't want to be on camera." I'm like,
indeed.
People see you all the time. Do you not walk down the street? Do you not go to the supermarket? Do you not go anywhere? Does nobody ever see you? But yet that is a real thing, that people have this fear that somehow the camera is going to make them look completely different. And I get to a degree that it is confronting, because there you are framed up, and now you're putting yourself out there for everybody to see.
Indeed.
How do you get people over that initial?
Well, I'm smiling, and you can probably hear my smile, because I'm very fond of quoting one of my clients who said, "If there's anything worse than listening to yourself, it's watching yourself." So yes, you're absolutely right. There is that kind of fear of the camera, but as professionals in the 21st century, we need to overcome our fear of the camera because it's become so all pervasive. And in fact, a statistic even from a few years ago was that 85% of all online communication now is via video. So when you consider that, we as professionals, we actually need to get comfortable with the camera, as comfortable as we can with the camera. It's as you know, Anthony, it's a very foreign environment. I mean, the more you do it, the less foreign it becomes. But there's nothing remotely human about talking to that piece of glass, i.e. the camera lens. It's not human at all because there's no feedback. So when we're doing a live presentation or a meeting or whatever, we're reading those nonverbal signals all the time, consciously or otherwise, mostly unconsciously. But when we're doing a Zoom meeting, we're just looking at the piece of glass, and it gives us no feedback at all. If we're creating a video, and it's even worse because with this, you can't see other people on the screen. So it's important it's increasingly important to overcome our fear of the camera and get familiar, get conversant at least with the video medium. You don't have to be an expert in it, but you need to be conversant enough with it to not be intimidated by it, and to see it as a useful tool for communication, because it really is. It's very powerful.
Yeah, and as we talk about podcasting in particular, there's definitely a trend towards doing more and more video podcasting. And, the debate about whether it's worthwhile or not is for a separate time. But there definitely is a lot of video-based podcasts that are out there. And we're seeing platforms like Apple now introducing that opportunity to show video as well as the obvious one being YouTube. So when you've got that reality that is happening. And indeed, one of the things that I know I do with all of my clients, or most of my clients, there are the odd exception, where we'll make sure we at least have the video to use as reels, so that you've got the short stories or reels that are going out that are that very important bit from a podcast that is going to hopefully entice people to want to listen to the full episode. So it means that, and I use this word deliberately, you have to be performing all the time.
Yes, you do. Yes, it might be a small p performing rather than a capital P performing, but there's certainly an element of performance in being on the screen, whether it's a meeting or creating a video from a standalone video. And I have this concept, this trademark concept called the Stylized Version of You, which means that rather than, I've never subscribed to the fake it till you make it philosophy, because that means you have to be inauthentic to be someone that you're not, unless you're a really good actor. Most people aren't very good at that. But stylization, that's a theatrical term. Stylization means that you remain you, and we do this intuitively, that you slide up and down this continuum from absolutely you to absolutely someone else. And depending on the content of what you're saying and the context in which you're saying it, that will determine where along this continuum that you are. And because if we're having a chat with a colleague in a coffee shop, that's sort of semi-formal, still about business, but it's fairly informal. With the same information, if you're doing a presentation at a conference, that's very formal. So we dress differently, we prepare more, we rehearse, it's much more formal in that sense. And things like doing videos, that's quite highly stylized as well, for all the reasons we've just been talking about. You have to talk to a piece of glass. You have to perform to a degree, and so it's being conscious. It's active aware. I call it active awareness. Being aware is one thing. Being actively aware means that you know about something and you do something about changing it if you need to. So being actively aware of how one is coming across on camera is increasingly important these days, with so much video conferencing. And so it's important that we develop that self-awareness, that active self-awareness, to go, okay, well, what do I look like? You might replay a video that you've made or whatever, and you go, oh my God, that's terrible. And then you go, well, why is it terrible? What's wrong with it? And you start to analyze how to improve how you come across on camera. I mean, one of my clients recently, the first video we did together, I always say to my clients, never delete that video, because in a couple of weeks' time, when you have a look back, you'll realize how far you've come in terms of making high quality, good communicable videos, engaging videos that actually engage the audience, and they become part of a conversation. Even though it's a one-way conversation, ostensibly, they become part of depending on how we impart that information, they become part of a conversation, which, yes, it's one way, but they're included in it. So all those things, and it's keeping it human. I often say we've got to keep things human, and increasingly with AI and stuff, it's becoming less and less human. And that's why I always default back to body language being the truth teller, because our bodies will always tell the truth as to how we are feeling, what we really mean when we say certain words that we can lie about.
Yeah, you want to be able to stand out as not being AI, and I think that's an important aspect here for people to consider, is that there is no version of being perfect. You know,
No.
you don't compare yourself to necessarily someone who's working in a TV studio, because if you're working in a TV studio, first of all, you've definitely got some years of training before you're sitting on camera.
Absolutely.
Second of all, you've got makeup artists, you've got hairdressing, you've got people who are dressing you, you've got lots of different cameras, people looking at you all the time and making sure that this is perfect and that's like, you're in a podcast environment. You can't compare yourself to looking at the Today Show or whatever other show it might be, because that's not what you've got. And I don't think that necessarily putting yourself in a studio environment, and this is, I'm do all my podcasts online. We
Right.
can do them in a studio, but we do them all online. Is there a value in doing them online? Well, I think the value in doing a podcast, I should say in person, comes down to some of those verbal cues that you can get, and some of those non-verbal cues, I should say, that you can get by having someone really in front of you and no screen, as you you were mentioning before.
That's right.
But I think, but that is an environment that is not always easy for most people to replicate and do, because there's a cost involved, B, and it's not just the cost of getting the room, it's making sure you've got people operating cameras and recording different things, sorting all of that out, physically getting people together for it. Like, there's a lot of things that have to make that work. And I challenge most people as to whether there's a value in that for a standard podcast. I think if you have something that is more a celebrity getting some of the football ones are a good example. Well, it's kind of mates getting together and you want to see them around a table, and I get that. But even then, there's plenty of really great examples of podcasts in that sporting sphere that are all done online as well. So I think it's important to differentiate what you're going to do. And I think if you're going to be in a situation where you've got you're operating in a virtual environment, you need to still be able to present yourself in a way that people are going to want to take notice of you.
Well, indeed. And one of my other backgrounds is in television design. So I trained in London and I worked for the BBC, and I've done various design jobs for the ABC here and various other channels as well. And I suppose that gives me an additional layer of awareness of what's in the background behind me, the presenter. And it's important I often say you've got to think like a designer when you're doing a podcast, when you're doing any kind of video at all. You know, the classic one is you have a pot plant growing out of the back of your head, or apparently growing out of the back of your head, and things like that we don't. When we're doing, it's all about the content as far as we're concerned, but it also needs to be how you present that content, how you impart the information that you're trying to impart. So yes, you're right. I mean, you don't want to hire a studio because they're expensive and ridiculously out of reach for most people, and they're not necessary. A bit of basic lighting is all you need, really, but just that going with the awareness, with the active awareness of what's in the frame besides you. Have a look around. I was just working with a client the other day, and we rearranged her office. Her office looked fine. But there was a printer on one side and a PowerPoint on the other. So we moved things around, and we put certificates on the wall and just things. And it's a nice clean wall now. It's got some certificates, which instantly, before she even says a word about what she does, we can see her credibility up on the wall because there's two qualifications on the wall. And so just little hints like that don't take a lot of work. But if you think about how you dress the office that you are in, then it makes a huge difference, because we make those judgments very, very quickly. I joke and say 3 nanoseconds, but Yeah, that's not too far from the truth, I would have thought, because it's a subconscious thing. If you're in the kitchen with the range hood in the background, but you're talking about accountancy or something, well, there's something not quite congruent with that. So being aware of what we're seeing besides you, the danger is that we often assume that the information is the most important thing, and yes, it is. However, how you wrap that information up visually is equally important, because we have to engage, and that's why I talk about aesthetics. Why would you have to worry about aesthetics in a video about accountancy or engineering or mining or law? Well, the reality is, if you use nice pictures that are relevant, but if you use nice, attractive pictures to go with your video in the background of you, then that's going to make people hopefully look in the first place, and hopefully hold their attention 3 minutes in or a minute in or whatever, because there's something about aesthetics that makes us look, it compels us to look and think, oh, that's a nice picture. And then we're engaged with the video. So, well, a lot of people just dismiss aesthetics, say, oh yeah, well, it'll be fine. It's all about, whatever. But think about the aesthetics. Think about what it looks like. And that's another kind of non-verbal thing, really. It's another for the screen particularly. It's another non-verbal aspect of our communication online, our online communication, which, as I said before, 85% of all online communication is via video. So, and that's certainly not going to decrease. If anything, it's going to exponentially go through the roof, basically, because we tend not to read things anymore. We just want to see pictures, and so of course, video is wonderfully powerful medium for that. But we need to control it. We need to have enough command of it, or at least be conversant with it, to know what things to look for, how to set it up. The basic technology of having some lights. If you don't have lights, the camera can't see you. If the camera can't see you, your audience can't see you. It's pretty basic. So, but sometimes we need to state the bleeding obvious.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes you need to be called out on it, and I think the lights is a really important one when we talk about things here. And I remember when I was first setting up some of my stuff, it was a few years back, and a shout out to Daryl, who knows who he is, and I was showing him what I was doing, going, something's not right here because the camera's not performing as I want it to, and he goes, you need another light.
Yeah, right.
And because the camera is only as good as the lighting that you've got, and if you've got a pretty basic camera, which is what most people are using, then the less light that you have, the harder the camera is working, and therefore the less quality that you ultimately going to end up with. So having great lighting, which is not an expensive thing to be doing, is really a simple solution to it. And if anyone gets interested and wants to know more about lights, we can include links to what to buy and those sorts of things separately. But it's not expensive to do it. I know the light that I've got sitting just in front of me up here out of view, and you can see what happens when I put my hand in front of it. That light is, I think it's about $150, and it's sitting on a nice stand, and which you can get fairly cheaply as well. So it's not an expensive thing to be able to make you look good. And I think the important point here that I wanted to get to and get your take on is that ultimately our visual is our brand.
Absolutely.
And if you present, the way you present yourself is the brand that people are seeing. And if I was sitting here in a singlet and, a funny hat, you're going to think something very different to the way that I'm presenting myself today.
Indeed.
And so it is important that people understand that the way you present yourself, the same way you do if you are running a retail business and people are walking in through the door, you want to present yourself in a particular way. And you've only got to look at a McDonald's, for example, to see what consistency does in terms of they look. And you don't have to have a uniform, but you do have to have an on-brand version of what you want to look like.
That's absolutely right. And that goes back to my stylized version of you. That is a great example, Anthony. It was stylized version of you because you are consciously thinking about, how am I coming across? Do I need to slide up the continuum a bit more formal for this? Oh, I need more light. Okay, that's something I need to think about. So you're absolutely right. And lighting is pretty basic. as you pointed out, it's pretty basic, and the camera does have to work too hard and goes all grainy. I mean, you would be familiar with the classic 3-point lighting setup. That's the the default 45 degrees either side, up and out, in front of you, and if you can, have a light behind you as well to separate you from the background. So there's a classic 3-point lighting setup: a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. But you can't always have that, especially if you're on location, if you're shooting something outside. But if you can set that up in your office, studio, wherever, bedroom, then at least you've got that consistency. And as you're right, the consistency of how you show up each time, and it's the same way, whether it's, you don't have to have a uniform, you're right, but you try and wear a logo if you can, or you have a consistent thing in the background with a logo and the name of the business or whatever, like you have. And so it's really important that we get that consistency, because that's what defines brand. You're absolutely right. It defines brand, and we are, whether we want to be or not, we are all a brand, and certainly our businesses are, but we are as well. And how, I always say to clients, you're the personification of your organization. How you come across determines how your business comes across, and it's perceived and judged and assessed in the professional world. So you've got to make sure that you come across really well, because you are representing your business. You're the face of your business, literally. So all those things, there's a conscious awareness about all of that. That, you when you said before, the people working in TV studios, newsreaders, etc. I mean, they've been doing it for a long time, and they've been trained, so they're used to that very foreign environment. Most people aren't. This is quite a foreign environment for most people. So, I talk about, people often ask me whether to use a teleprompter when they're making videos. I used to discourage them originally, but I don't anymore. But if you're using a teleprompter, newsreaders have been doing it for 20 years. They can make reading a teleprompter sound like they're not reading. They make it conversational. Most people, when they first try a teleprompter, go, "Hello, my name's Chris Willems, blah, blah, blah," and they're obviously reading with a capital R. So we have to, if you're using a teleprompter, which is really handy if you've got lots of information, lots of shoots, lots of videos to shoot, or you've got lots of technical information that has to be absolutely correct. A teleprompter is a really, really useful thing, and they're quite inexpensive these days. But you've got to make sure, I call it rehearsed spontaneity. You've got to read it, but sound like you're having a conversation. And that's quite tricky. That takes a fair bit of practice to do that. And you'd be familiar with that, Anthony.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to jump in here and say to people listening as well that we'll include in the recommendation sheets, because I've got one that summarizes a lot of these things. And we do have links to how you can get a hold of a teleprompter as well. There's a great Australian company that does that. And there are, as you say, very inexpensive. I'm using one here today, and it makes all the difference, because it means that in engaging in a video right now, the camera is literally behind your head. So for people who may not understand how a teleprompter works, basically it's a projection of another screen. So it's a mirrored image. What's really great is because it's just a piece of glass that things are being projected onto, behind that piece of glass is the camera. And so I am looking down the lens at the moment, but it happens to be that Dr. Chris is sitting here in front of me, very directly in front of the camera. And it makes all of that difference when you're helping with some of those verbal cues. Non-verbal cues. I keep saying the non-verbal cues. There's a nice correction point. But what I wanted to there are a couple of other things I want to get into, but I did want to ask you some simple tips for people in terms of thinking about their brand and the way they present themselves. What are some things that you think are absolutely critical for people to consider in how they're presenting themselves, just from the, talking about whether they wear makeup or what clothes they wear, all of those kinds of basics?
Well, as you pointed out before, consistency is really important. So whatever you decide, that is your brand, and so you need to demonstrate that consistently. If you're in a professional context, and that's kind of what we're talking about, the professional context, business to business professional context, then that active awareness is really important. And having things like a logo. I'm wearing a shirt with a logo at the moment, and so having things like that, it's not crucial. It depends on who you're trying to reach and communicate with. It's not crucial, but it's a handy thing. There's a consistency about that. That if people see that logo every time, then okay, that's Dr. Chris. So I know what he's going to be talking about. Because the package, how we package up our information, it's really important to not lose sight, literally not lose sight of the fact that it's visual as much as it is verbal. And talking about the nonverbals, the Moravian research before 55, nonverbal 38, how you sound, and 7% words. If we translate that to the on-screen context, then if you replace a large part of the nonverbal with the visuals around you, what you're sharing the frame with, that's a really huge. It becomes a huge factor. You can do a live presentation on a stage with a neutral background. That's fine, but on camera we are literally in a frame, and so you've got the opportunity to fill that frame with really pertinent information. Not too much; it's still very clean and uncluttered, but fill it with pertinent information that's going to help and support the words that you say. Okay, and so you as the presenter are really, really important, obviously, because that's who's imparting the information. That's who people are relating to, or not, depending on how you come across. But what you share that frame with is so important. So the visuals become much more important than they do in a live presentation or in a boardroom or whatever. And because we're literally stuck in a frame. And how we fill that frame is really crucial. And also things like duration of videos becomes an issue, because whilst we can happily talk for 20 minutes about a topic, in a live situation, on camera, people will not tend to, unless it's instructive and they have to follow a process or whatever, but people aren't going to listen to or watch a 20-minute video unless it's really, really engaging, and in the same sort of shot, and because and Anthony, you would know the things like variety of shots. If you can intercut things with a variety of shot sizes, and or cutaways to the sea or some trees or whatever, that helps to visually punctuate what's in the frame. But just having a talking head for 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour, in some instances, without breaking it up in some way. That becomes a bit tedious, and podcasts are a really good example of when people are engaged, they will listen to a podcast, they'll watch a podcast because it's engaging, but it may not be the most engaging. It might be a really engaging topic, but it mightn't be a very engaging presenter who's presenting that topic, or vice versa. Could be a really interesting presenter with a really boring topic. Ideally, you want to go category 4, interesting topic, interesting presenter, to sustain the interest. But visual punctuation is just as important as punctuation in written words and written texts. So we don't just babble on without stopping. We punctuate it with full stops and commas, et cetera, et cetera.
And just to show you a bit of an example for those that are watching at the moment. So I'm going to do something here where I'm going to show you, I've got a second camera here. So people who are familiar with me on the show will know that often at times I will turn to the second camera for little bits and pieces just to make exactly that point. And then we can come back here. Now, that's not something that everybody has in their armory for their setup. And it is a little bit more, a little bit harder to manage and do those things. But it is an example of how you can punctuate those things.
Indeed. And sorry to interrupt it, Anthony, but what we're doing at the moment, we're having a conversation, which is a bit different to just looking down the lens and talking for an hour. We're having a conversation, so it's toing and froing, and there's interaction there that people can follow, and it has a narrative. It has an automatic narrative to it that develops as we go through. So that's in itself is kind of punctuation, but yes, we need to. Our concentration spans are very, very short. I used to, a few years ago, I was timing the length of scenes in a television drama, and they used to be about 3 to 5 seconds, sometimes a bit longer. But now there's a cut pretty much every second when we're looking at, or there's a moving camera or something. Yeah, I call it our default visual vocabulary, because we've been watching television and films for so many decades. We have this unconscious default visual vocabulary that we expect certain things to happen. We now expect the punctuation. We if something's a really long shot, we get a bit irritated by it, because Yeah, unless it's a sweeping panorama of wildebeest or whatever, there's got to be a long shot. But generally speaking, in normal television and video, we need to break it up and punctuate it because our attention spans have become so short. Someone said the other day that we've become our attention spans are shorter than a goldfish. The joke used to be the attention span of now human attention spans are shorter than that of a goldfish, which is a bit of a worry. But if the topic is interesting enough, and it's our job to make it interesting enough, if the topic is interesting enough and the presenter is interesting enough or engaging enough, then that should carry for however long it needs to carry. But certainly punctuation is a really big thing. And I always say never let a mime artist start talking. You can't shut them up. So I've been talking for a lot now because I'm a converted mime artist or a recovering mime artist. So
Recovering mime artist.
25 years of saying nothing.
Well, we might have to put you on the spot to do a bit of mime for to finish up on the show. But before we get to that, I actually want to ask you a question that is really interesting. That when it comes to the, particularly for the men, I think we focus a little bit on women with makeup and things, which tends to be a bit more them than although plenty of men do wear makeup as well, particularly for the camera work. But I wanted to ask you about things that are. You talk about you've got a beard, for example, and there are some people that will say that that's not a good thing because you're hiding something. And it's the same with glasses as well. I remember, someone telling me years ago, going, "Oh, you can't wear glasses if you're on camera." And of course, there is if you get the lighting wrong, then you get a lot of reflection off your glasses. So that's not a good thing. But more that, is there something inhibiting people and stopping it? And how important is that, particularly when you're talking on an online kind of environment? Because you do see traditionally on television, for example, most news leaders have got contact lenses or they can see properly.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult thing. I'm one of these people who contact lenses just don't agree with me. So I don't have a choice. I can take the glasses off, but I'm really not going to be able to see particularly well if I do that. Yeah. And does it make a difference?
Well, and that's a very good point. And yes, the makeup thing is I think a personal choice. If putting makeup on helps you feel more confident, then by all means do it. I personally never wear makeup and never did as a mime artist either. It's a bloody nuisance. And I don't need to wear makeup to help me feel confident. Some people want to do that. They like having makeup because it makes them feel better about themselves and feel more confident in terms of that engagement. In terms of the glasses, I wear reading glasses and I wear them on camera, even though, yes, your reflections, you're absolutely right, that can be an issue unless the lighting is spot on. But there's and I don't wear them for these reasons, but there's something about putting on glasses that makes you look 10 times more intelligent all of a sudden. And I don't know how people wear contact lenses. I just couldn't cope with doing stuff to my eyes like that. But I think it's always a personal choice, and it depends on who you are, what you personally need and professionally need to define your brand and you as a professional, and whatever one needs to do, then you do that because it makes you feel good. It's like if you're wearing stubbies and thongs, it mightn't make you feel real professional. I always say that what you wear influences how you feel influences how you come across determines how you are perceived in the professional world. So all those things feed back, and so if you need to get frocked up a bit to do a podcast or a Zoom meeting, then get frocked up because if it makes you feel more professional, then that will come across in the body language. Again, we go back to the non-verbals that we see even on the screen.
We're going to have to wrap things up in a moment or two, but I do want to point out a couple of things for people. So as I mentioned earlier on, there's going to be an ebook that people will be able to download that belongs to Dr. Chris here. It's called Going Digital. And I'm going to read the title here, what you need to know before you set foot or face in front of a video. So that's an important one for people to be able to download. I'm sure that will be of value. We also will have a workbook that's downloadable from this episode of the podcast, giving you all the tips and tricks that we've gone through here today. and some action steps for you to take, as well as some key quotes from the episode. So there'll be a note in the show notes on how to get access to that. But just to wrap things up, because I'm fascinated coming back to this whole mime thing that you did for 25 years, how does those kinds of things that you've learned, and obviously we're not telling you to, give us a mime of a wall and someone peering through a window is kind of the typical thing that we all sort of know. But how important are, and how much can you teach people some of those non-verbal cues, and that you've learned from that whole idea of, mime essentially is creating something when people can't do anything other than watch it.
Well, indeed, and I actually adapted one of my solo shows for television, and that's a whole story in itself. But in doing that, see, a theatre audience, when you're watching mime, a theatre audience will utilise their imagination. I always say that as a performer in theatre, the best thing you've got, the greatest resource you've got, and it costs you nothing, is the audience's imagination. So with mime, the audience is actually working really hard, even though they don't know they're working really hard, because they're imagining all the stuff that you're sort of creating out of pieces of air. In adapting that for television, it was a very different beast, because a television audience won't do that. A television audience will not invest imaginatively the same way a theatre audience will. It might be the same people, but they won't invest because we're so used to this, again, is that default visual vocabulary. We expect to see pictures on television. And my mime teacher always said you can't do mime on television, so I decided to prove him wrong. And I did. And it went on to win a whole stack of awards and stuff. But what you have to give on screen is more visual information than you do in the theatre as a mime artist. So, and that becomes a bit of a dilemma, really, because, well, when does it stop being mime? How do you, and we went through this with adapting Son of Romeo. It was a solo version of Romeo and Juliet done in the style of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. So we went through this process, the core team went through this process of going, okay, well, this moment here, what's happening here, is this mime? How do we impart the information visually or not? Do we not? Do we, and that was a very intense and intensive process of determining how much or how little the audience would invest their imagination. So in terms of this kind of video, that business videos that we're making, that's why I always come back to the visuals. If you can provide enough visual information that supports and reinforces and enhances what you're saying without necessarily giving everything, then that's always a good thing, because we still listen to the words and we still watch you, the presenter, presenting those words. And that's really important, because we relate to, human beings relate to other human beings, even through a screen. We relate to other human beings. You might see some television presenters that you go, oh, I don't like them. You don't even know them, but there's something about them that doesn't click, and others you go, oh, they're great. So it's the humanness. I always come back to the humanness of the interaction and the engagement, because ultimately that's what we relate to or not. How well we can engage through the dehumanizing medium of the camera lens, how we can continue to engage meaningfully with our audience. So it always comes back to being human.
That's a great way to wrap things up. And I think I would just add to the end of that, it's being authentic. Don't be kind of all over the top and do these kinds of gesticulations and things because you think that you need to attract attention, because that's not going to draw people in. You have to be authentic and real with how you do it, and make sure that it's not completely over the top, unless that is your personality and then just your brand.
Indeed.
Stay true.
Yeah, if you want to be a game show, well, if you want to be a game show host, be one, but you probably don't have to be a game show host.
No, absolutely. Well, listen, Dr. Chris, thank you so much for being a part of the program, because you've given us so much information for people to tune into. So I really appreciate you being part of it.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Delighted to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Thanks very much.
And a reminder to everyone, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode of Podcast Done For You, the show. And of course, all the information in the show notes on how to get in touch with Dr. Chris and myself at Podcast Done For You, and all of that information as well about how you can get some great downloads. We look forward to your company next time on Podcast Done For You show.